Hi, Kendall.
Hi, Kelsey.
Thanks for joining us today.
It's so good to see you, and I'm so grateful to be here. So, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So for those of you who have joined us today, we are talking with my dear friend Kendall, and we're going to get into who she is and what she does in a minute. But first, we have the pleasure of receiving our opening check-in meditation from her. So I'm going to pass it over to you and enjoy what you have to offer.
All right, thank you. So, first off, I'd like you to start by closing your eyes and bring both feet onto the ground. So, uncross your legs and orient yourself in your body. Feel your breath moving into and out of your nose or your mouth today. And take a few deep inhales and exhales to arrive. And as you drop in a level deeper, feel your feet on the ground again. Feel your sitting bone against the chair. And invite yourself to sit up a little taller so that you can feel the crown of your head reach up into the space above you. Taking a moment to relax your jaw, your shoulders, your fingers, and your toes. Give them a little wiggle if you need to. And what we're going to start with as part of our meditation today is moving into a reverse the day meditation. So this is an anthroposophical practice of orienting yourself to this current time and place. And sequentially going backwards from where you are right now to the time that you woke up this morning. So take a breath to arrive back into this space, into this present moment. Relaxing your jaw, your fingers, your toes. And start to think about how from this moment backwards sequentially, what you did, maybe some thoughts or feelings, emotions that accompanied that. And walk yourself backwards through your day to the morning. There certainly can be some tendency for the mind to want to wander or stray. So if that happens, just compassionately bring it back to taking yourself backwards through your entire day and keeping your brain on this particular path. And once you have arrived back through your entire day, take a few deep breaths. Take notice of your experiences, the sensations, they're all important, the feelings, the emotions that accompany that. But utilizing all of our practices that we learn to study ourselves in the present, quieting the mind, and being gentle with ourselves. On your next exhale, please lower your chin down to your chest. Blink your eyes open slowly. Just take a look around at the floor and slowly start to trace your eyes back up. Just taking a moment to look around the room, bringing yourself back into this space, to this present time, and arrive completely, bit by bit, piece by piece, inviting yourself back in gently with love and open arms. And thank yourself for being here today. So thank you again.
Thank you. That was awesome. So great. That meditation I've done before, it's so funny. My mind wants to jump all over the place to like my favorite parts of the day and like skip over the ones that, I mean, I had a great morning, but it's funny how I wanted to focus on particular things. So that was great.
Yeah.
I haven't done that meditation in a while. Really good. So we are talking with Kendall, and Kendall, I'm just gonna pull up so I can introduce you properly, because Kendall is full of so many great things. So Kendall is actually Dr. Kendall Hassemer, and she's a naturopathic doctor, nutrition and well-being expert, lover of the outdoors, craniosacral therapist, earth advocate, and yoga and mindfulness instructor. She has trained in so many wonderful different things. Her business is all about combining together the holistic approach of yoga and movements with natural health. And she is a conscious partner, friend, yoga instructor, as we've already talked about. She focuses on Rewild medicine, which we'll hear about in a little bit. And she has got some wonderful offerings coming up around that. And we're going to dive right into Kendall's story and what she has to offer. We met in many years ago, I think like 8 years ago. She and my husband trained with the same yoga instructor, trainer. And then I went to a couple of her classes on the recommendation of Lee when she was living in Portland. She now lives in Santa Barbara. And then we kind of stayed in touch and then reconnected last summer, and we just started talking. We kind of had those few moments where we just kind of geeked out on our businesses and what we're doing in life. And then she invited me to come teach at UC Santa Barbara when she was a professor there. And I got to go and speak to a class about addiction and my own story with addiction, which was an amazing experience for me. So we have been weaving together our lives for a while, and I just want to thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else that you want to add into that little intro that I might have missed?
I think you covered it. I think that's wonderful. And it was such an honor to have you speak at our class too, because you're doing such great work in the world of addiction. So thank you. And trauma and recovery.
Yeah, thanks. So we have so much we can talk about. I'm so curious. I'm like, where should we start? I think we should start with, the reason why I love this podcast, it is, basically we're just having a conversation in our living room, so we can start wherever we'd like. And I think personally, I'd love to start with sort of what you brought up right before we hit the record button. Just about how your life, which I think is a really important thing to talk about, because so often when we talk about trauma, we talk about there can be a specific big one-time trauma, and we often don't talk about accumulated stress and complex, or what we call complex trauma, where there's just little things that are happening throughout life, and they maybe don't get necessarily addressed, and it does accumulate, and it does take its toll on us for sure. And So I'd love to talk about how your life, what are the things and how was that for you, and how did you recognize that it was and I want to remind the listeners that I use trauma in a very loose form here, where it can be a painful experience. But how I express trauma is that all of a sudden your life kind of creates this vortex around your stress response, and it's hard for you to shift out, and whatever is happening with health issues and all those things that start to happen when we're sort of in that sympathetic charged place all the time. So just want to remind our listeners about that before we dive in, because I think it's important to talk about that, especially when it's accumulated stress and that sort of complex trauma. So I'd love to hear like where that started for you, and I know that in your notes that you sent me, that sort of like inspired you to be where you are today and what you have to offer. So I feel like what you're offering will naturally come out of your story.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot because I see clients and patients who have this accumulated stress, like you've mentioned, and how I see that translate in the body is to chronic disease.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's a chronic disease that shows up in our later years, 60s, 70s, 80s, if those are our later years,
Mm-hmm.
or even currently insidious things like headaches and anxiety, nervousness, digestive issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so prevalent. And I asked myself, where is this coming from? And my experience growing up, and from the outside, I had a wonderful childhood. I had two parents that stayed together and are still together. And we grew up in a home with food and shelter and water, and we went on family vacations, and we had family that lived nearby that we'd visit for holidays. And many people are having the experience of that being true for them, and many are also not having that experience. Mm-hmm. And there's a relative amount of safety that's present in that type of upbringing, but there's also a relative amount of unsafety according to what you're feeling in your own heart. Mm-hmm. And so I noticed from a very young age that I was always the sensitive, emotional child. Mm-hmm. I'd be very much the first person to cry. I was also very happy and giggly. And as life continued and different experiences happened, I noticed that there were certain things that started to weigh me down. Mm-hmm. There are instances where life is hard. That story came into play. You're not always going to get what you want. And both of these things are true. But I think if we start to orient from that place regularly, that becomes a little bit more challenging for a sensitive, empathic child. Mm-hmm. So I guess where I really feel like my work has evolved now because of my childhood is that I was definitely someone who was sensitive, and I ended up getting a lot of lung issues. And so I was in the hospital consistently every year. And interestingly, it was right about clockwork when my father would leave to go hunting. And so he'd leave for these hunting trips. And I think that the little girl in me just wanted attention. Dad, where are you going? What about me?
Yeah.
And I still have that come up even in the context of my relationship with my current partner. Where are you going? What about me?
Yeah.
And all of these things start to play out over and over again unless we tend to them, even if we tend to them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when I was growing up with those lung issues and in the hospital, it definitely impacted my relationships. I wasn't able to participate as much in school events because I was sick. So I'd stay home from school a lot. I'd take a lot of antibiotics. I felt depressed. I didn't know that at the time. Mm-hmm. I felt low energy. I didn't feel confident at all. Mm-hmm. There was this undermining sense of, you are someone who is sick, you're different, that makes you someone that people don't really want to hang out with, right? Mm-hmm. And so over time, I started to kind of wall myself off. I became really shy. I became really giggly. I really liked fashion, so that was a way for me to express myself and get compliments.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of hid behind that for a bit. I definitely had friends. I was nice. I was always the nice person.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that nice girl syndrome, if you will, started to really catch up with me in my late teens, early 20s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I started to really engage in friendships, right, that maybe weren't serving me to the best of their ability. I would seek out partnerships that were less than fulfilling to my heart. Even though I deeply loved that person, at my core, I wasn't getting what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it started to derail me a bit. And when I had all of these experiences in the hospital, I recognized that even the doctors and the nurses weren't able to give me the love and support that I really needed. And there were times that they made mistakes too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to be an advocate for my own health even then.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me realize that I needed to advocate for people's health if I wanted them to feel a sense of wellness. So all of that put together, in my later years, I ended up seeing an osteopath when I was 14. And this was at a time that I was on 5 inhalers, a nebulizer treatment at home almost daily. So I was breathing through a little tube to help myself just get enough oxygen to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt like this was no way to live. And coupled with the aspect of having a sensitive personality, I was smart, pretty, I was in my kind of groove as a high school and college student. And I started to stifle all of the parts of me that were really strengths, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
empathic, smart. And so to downplay those was starting to squash my health. Once I saw this osteopath, I was completely inspired to go seek out naturopathic medicine, which I did. Here I am. And after 10 years of school and that own sets of trauma and fatigue coming from that, I recognized that I wasn't alone, that the experiences that I accumulated over the years and have now since healed in many ways. I'm no longer asthmatic, I would say. I have helped to bring myself to a sense of self-worth that I appreciate. I've helped others to find that same thing in their self through communication and through relating to other people in a really positive way, putting yourself out there and getting out into the planet, which is something that I always recommend. If you are disconnected from yourself, get outside.
Mm-hmm.
It will bring you back really quick.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in ways you don't really want to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that has most informed my work. So going from a place of consistent illness to now consistent wellness, and it's so easy to slide back.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to help people with that slide and also to keep them moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. There was so many good little pieces in there that I'd like to touch on. I think the first thing I'd really like to dive into a little bit more is this. I mean, I was the same way as a kid, like super sick. And for me, it was lung stuff and also digestion. Mm-hmm. And I always think about how, kids who are extra sensitive, who can seem to, it's really hard for them to process their environment. And, breathing, I always say, is our direct experience from outer world to inner world. Same with eating. It's literally how we are trying to metabolize life on an energetic level as well. And I often see kids with asthma or digestive problems, and I see how sensitive they are. And it's so true that, I often talk about the stubbing toe theory, where one kid can stub their toe and kind of laugh about it, and one kid can stub their toe and it's like, oh my gosh, that was like really traumatic, depending on when it happened, what was going on around them, how stressed out they already were. And it doesn't, yes, there's some traumas or things out there that are quite severe in nature, but the littlest things, like having your dad leave and not being able to know how to voice that or how to like interact with him, can be extremely traumatizing for children. I had a similar thing. My dad would always leave for work. And so I think it's really important to talk about that aspect, and also with children when they have these chronic things. You know, I feel really passionate about bringing more awareness around that conversation of like, maybe this is something more than just they have weak lungs, or more than just their digestion is sensitive. Like, what's going on in the environment around them? I mean, even as adults, you know, it's the same. It still applies to us as adults as well.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And so, how do you, I know in your practice, I'm sure that you talk about these types of things, but how do you bring up those conversations, or how do you address those things with your clients, or to sort of help to bring more awareness around those things? Because I find it can be a sensitive subject, you know, because in our culture, we're not necessarily trained or even taught to think that way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a sensitive subject, because I think it shifts the responsibility back onto ourselves,
right,
for having to address it.
Mm-hmm.
And it really depends on the patients and clients that are coming in to see me, and their personality,
Mm-hmm.
and what they're willing to address right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some people who come in, and we know this for our own selves too. They come in and they just want to kind of check it out, see what naturopathic medicine is,
Mm-hmm.
maybe do a craniosacral session, and we start to work on the layers little by little.
Mm-hmm.
And then I joke with some of my other clients who are more what I call cold turkey clients. They're like, all right, I'm ready to do whatever you tell me immediately, and let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we start to dive back through the layers of talking about, where are the pieces in you from your childhood, from current events, from your relationships, that I hear that are a consistent theme that we can start to look at. How you do anything is how you do everything, right? And Cheryl Huber, I believe, is the name of that therapist, who talks about that being a commonality in the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we are experiencing kind of what we perceive as a shortcoming in one area, if it's a love relationship, it's probably happening in our work or workplace in another way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we bring that up, maybe we talk about the place that's a little bit easier to address for the clients first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important. And it's kind of similar to something that we call in somatic experiencing, where we it's called titration, where we're like just touching on these things, and then touching a little bit more, and then touching a little bit more. And I find that one of the challenges I see out in the world, especially with health advocates, is there's kind of this like, well, it needs to be like this, and you need to have awareness around this, and it's kind of like not titrated, like this is the way it is, you should be looking at this. And it's really hard for people to shift in that way. It's like someone's basically telling you you're wrong, you're doing it wrong, you need to be doing it this way, and you're not going to get better unless you do it this way. And it's really hard for people to grasp onto that. So I think like exactly what you're saying is such medicine about like, let's look at the layers and start at the most superficial layer, and then keep going under until we can really address it when the whole system or the whole being or the whole person is really ready to hear it and receive it.
Yeah, and I think very similar to the work that you offer is that if you uncover it and address it too quickly, that's one part. And then if somebody's told that they're wrong, we just bring up defensiveness and the whole alarming and flooding from the sympathetic nervous system. And so you relive and repeat all of those traumas and experiences, now also under the guise of a healthcare professional or whomever it is bringing it up that tells you that it is wrong and you are bad. And we don't need any more of that to feel well, that's for sure.
And just weaving back into the self-confidence piece where when someone has been unwell, especially as women, because I mean, we're still living in a society where it's changing, which I love, but it's still society where women we're scary if we're confident, or we're scary if we're really powerful, or, so there's not a lot of women who are they've had to do a lot of work to feel that way. And when you do have all this illness or things that have not let you live a quote unquote normal life, which is the majority of us. It seems like at this point, we all have these stories that have affected us in some way. And I feel like that self-confidence piece is really, really key. So I'm curious when you talked about, the self-confidence being a really hard thing for you, where was that shift? Like, when did you start to notice? Was it when you started taking your health into your own hands and really saying I need to be an advocate for myself, or was it later on? Like, when did you really start to notice? And I guess I'm really curious too, did it shift as you were shifting from all of your issues into this place of well-being?
Yeah, so I think something that you reminded me of as well, with the lung issues that I was having, lung and digestive complaints often go together. And if you think about it from the aspect of the lung being where we breathe in the spirit, right, and our prana and our life force, and our digestion being the place where we take in and absorb our nutrients, we are no longer what we eat, we are what we absorb. And so if you put all of that into context with self-confidence, right? If we're not able to breathe and we're not able to absorb appropriately with appropriate barriers and boundaries, our external life experience, it's no wonder that our self-confidence becomes undermined over time. And so I think this happens in really small ways, and people don't even notice that it's happening, which was true for me. And so when I started to notice that, I am not behaving in alignment with what I feel like would be most powerful for me, or I'm not making a decision based on what I think is right, I want that person to like me. Oh, I want to make sure that I'm not too smart because that might threaten that person, like you brought up, especially around other women. And when I started to shift, wasn't linear, as I don't think any process is linear. I would start to shift, and then I'd slip back a little bit, and then I'd have to reteach myself and re-notice that this isn't who I am. And so just as the shifts backwards happened in an insidious fashion, moving forward was a way for me to take a step and slide and take a step and slide until I had a little bit more of that foundation and trust underneath my feet to keep heading in the direction that I felt was most empowered and most strong and most gracious. We're not always nice to ourselves in that process.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know the author Adya Shanti?
Yes.
Yeah. I can't remember what book it was in, but he spoke of the path of, you can call it whatever, the path of healing or path of spirituality or path of growth is like a ladder. And the further you get up, the greater the fall. And at first it's like, oh, we fall off the first step. It's kind of like, oh, it's not that bad. But when you get so far and you have a little setback, or you forget, or you step back into old patterns, that fall can feel sometimes pretty intense, because we've felt like we've grown so much, and like, how could we be back here? Why am I feeling self-conscious again? Or, and it is that I do find that further down the path, the compassion piece and just forgiveness piece and like being like, okay, it's okay, we're just here, like it's another learning opportunity, becomes easier. But definitely in the beginning, the being hard on yourself, which I'm still hard on myself a lot.
With you. Yeah.
It is hard because you know that process is the process of change is not always easy, but it can be easeful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I also want to say that I have a very long way to go. I think that's why we're here in this body, right?
Yeah.
So I think that I've learned all these things, and I think that, oh, I have it figured out, when really that's not the case, because there's going to be something else that comes in and challenges me and throws me off of my game a little bit. And it's my opportunity to stand up and say, what am I going to do about this? And also what you said is that it can really feel disheartening and can draw you into depression. And if you have experienced depression, or you've experienced that long span of inertia, it is terrifying to fall, because there is a piece in your brain that's hardwired, because it's quick to go there, right? That says, see, this is where you are again.
Yeah.
You're probably going to be here for a long time. So if you can stick with the voices inside of you that say, yeah, you're here right now, but you saw yourself bounce back, you can rise above that. I think that's absolutely something that we have to call on in those times where it feels like it's pretty scary.
Yeah. I think that's such an important piece to just embellish on a little bit, is of like that fear response, where, I mean, I've definitely experienced it whenever I am having a hard time and I can feel that depression because I suffered from depression. I do have that fear of like, oh no, here I go again. And I've worked through that part. I'd say the health issue that is most like scary for me right now is with my adrenals, which I've talked to you a lot about. I have just gotten this year, my adrenals are like almost back to where they were before I got really sick. But I have those days, right, where I've overdone it a little bit, and I'm like, oh God, I'm crashing. Like I have this, like it is this like fear, and I'm like, I gotta like rest, and I gotta like take all these vitamins, and actually it's just that, you know, my husband the other day, he's like, well, of course you're tired. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, I'm not supposed to be tired anymore. He's like, you did a 2-hour jujitsu workshop one day, and then the next day you hiked 6 miles, and the next day you hiked 3.5 miles, and then you went horseback riding the next day. Of course you're tired today. And I'm like, right. Like, it's just, anyone would be tired
for
after
our
that.
Strong partners.
Yeah.
Yes, too, to give us that reflection.
Yeah, and it is in those moments. I find it's those moments it's really good to check in and not like, okay, I'm feeling this fear come up, and is this true? Is this an actual true feeling? You know, and having that time to check in. And speaking about just saying the nature piece, I know that's a big part of what you're offering now, and how nature can be such good medicine, even in those moments where you are feeling unwell, to just get yourself out into nature so that you can, it just helps to sort of clear all that clutter really naturally and connect in. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, I know that you and your partner right now are adventuring almost every weekend and being out in nature, and it's a big part of your own healing path. And I'd love for you to just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that is something we're absolutely trying to promote in our own life so that we can, you know, help bring that to other people. And that takes me back again. There's this little voice that comes in when I'm starting to lead these retreats that are coming up for us. We're leading our first retreat together in December down in Mexico. And I've been dabbling in all the things that I thought I would never be good at, right? When I was not able to breathe, that's probably a big key piece why I wasn't very athletic. And not feeling that self-confidence, right? It's hard to put yourself out there energetically, let alone athletically.
Mm-hmm.
And the piece of getting out there to just connect with seeing the water in your hands, right? Moving over your body, seeing the leaves on the trees dance in the light. These are all ways that is proven that we readjust our nervous system to acclimate and also to respond to what's happening around us.
Mm-hmm.
So similar to some of the orientation exercises that I know you talk about and teach, and similar to how we breathe to bring ourselves into our body, nature gives us that outward experience to give us an excuse to unplug, to unwind, to just detach from all of the responsibilities that we step into when we're born with a superhero cape or a superheroine cape. We're like, yeah, I've got this all day long. And really, I just take that thing off and I go out there and I'm like, all right, it's just me. It's what I have on my back. Or if I'm out in the water, it's just me. And holy shit, there's a wave coming at me. I better do something about it. And it puts me into action rather than reaction.
And what is it like for you now, experiencing the ability to do the things that you thought you would never be able to do? I mean, I'm sure it was a long time where people probably were even telling you that you're never going to be able to do these things, which is so so hard to take in and to hear. So what's your experience of it now, like since you were told and thought, maybe believed that you wouldn't be able to do it?
Yeah, I think that with those complex traumas or stresses that were building up over time, my voice was probably the strongest, unfortunately, in telling me that I couldn't do those things. And that was a really sad piece for me to overcome, right? That my own internal voice was telling me, no, you don't do that because you could get hurt, or you aren't strong enough, and you don't know enough. And for me to build up my self-confidence to be able to get out there, put a backpack on, hike for 15 miles a day, and then set up camp and do it all again the next day, or to get out in the water in a place that can be very scary, right? All these places where you have to overcome the physical nature of the ocean, people's fear of sharks, people's fear. My worst one is actually stingrays these days.
I'm drowning. I surf, but I'm terrified of drowning.
And we all have our things, right? Yeah. And so I think in this world where pictures depict this very strong, perfect approach to whatever it is we're doing, nature really provides us with that reminder that it's all a process. And again, that it's not linear. So anything that's beautiful has had a way for it to grow and to build, and it also is destroyed over and over again. And as humans, we don't really like that destruction process. We like everything to be neat and packaged and just so. And then if we can capture it just so, then everyone else will think our life is great and wonderful. But when you really get out and put yourself into a place of vulnerability, it takes a lot of courage to face those own internal voices much more than a lot of the other things that we're going to face in our life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have a specific adventure that you felt like I've done it? Like my issues from the past. I mean, yes, they come up and our things still come up, but sort of like, I guess more on like a health perspective of like, okay, I can do all the things that I want to do. Was there like a pivotal backpacking trip or surf trip or experience where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing the things I thought I never would be able to do?
There's probably so many ways that I could describe that, but I'll try to condense that down. I think that one of the trips that came to mind right away was this backpacking trip I did out to the Nepali coast, the northern shore of Kauai.
Mm-hmm.
And it was right around my Saturn returns, and whether people believe in that or not, that's
Mm-hmm.
totally fine. I was around 28, I believe, and I hiked the whole thing, and I had never done a trip like that before. And I trained for an hour without a backpack before that trip. And luckily I'm strong. So I went out and I did it. And that wasn't the hard part. It was the sheer drop off of the cliffs
Mm-hmm.
that was super scary for me.
Mm-hmm.
And we came back for the last 5 miles of the trip. My ankle gave out. I don't have weak ankles.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt like it was this powerful spiritual force that just took over. Interesting, it was my left ankle because that is the feminine, right? The nourishing piece. And I was pushing so hard to make my way through this. And there were points that I thought that I was not going to make it, right? If it wasn't for my partner at the time, he was a rock star. Like I remember him putting on a headlamp and saying, look to your left, look to your right, don't go that way, that's the ocean. Because there were these jungle frogs that were jumping at us, and they're not scary in and of themselves, but when they're big and they bounce against your legs, the tendency is to move out of the way, right?
Yeah.
And so the last 2 miles, he basically helped to carry me out. And it was one of those experiences where I was shaking inside and out. And the last 2 miles are the easiest miles, by the way. There's not the cliffs that you're experiencing the rest of the way. And I had this moment where I really knew that it wasn't me that was having the, I guess, setback. It was really my connection with my, I guess, spiritual forces and how they weren't in alignment. And when we got out, luckily we had a week to stay in a really nice place, and instead of roughing it camping, you know, and we immediately, my ankle was back to normal. There was no pain, no discomfort. I wasn't limping.
Divine
And,
intervention.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe I just needed that knight in shining armor to carry me out of the woods and out of the jungle.
Let yourself be carried.
Right?
Yeah.
And after that experience, I realized that when you're not in alignment, mind, body, and spirit, that it's near impossible to move forward. So no matter what difficult experience I find myself in outdoors, and granted, I'm not an adventure seeker. I'm not looking for adrenaline. I am looking for pure positive experience that's still going to challenge the heck out of me for sure. But when those aren't in alignment, we become ill. And so whether you manifest that physically or you manifest that as a digestive complaint, a skin issue, cancer, we have to stay in alignment. And so nature reminds me to do that. And that was one of my pivotal moments to recognize that it doesn't even have to take time. It can be instant, that we get this reminder that we can do it, and we have it within our ability to shift our experience on the spot.
Beautiful. That's such a great story. I love hearing stuff like that. Like I had the similar experience where my adrenals were crashing, and I basically made some really hard decisions and had to let go of a bunch of stuff that I was involved in and just realign, like literally realign what I'm focusing on. And the next day I woke up fine. Like, and that was here. And I was like, whoa, right. Okay. I need to like listen to, you know, that listening piece of listening to not where you think you should be going, but where you are supposed to be guided. You know, like you have this path that you're going to walk, and you have these gifts that you're going to give. And sometimes we think we're supposed to be doing something else. And really, when we say yes to what is absolutely true, and really get in alignment, it's pretty amazing how life shifts for you.
It is so amazing. And I think in that too, because you can hear about these stories, right? And I'm sure you've been there, Kelsey, where people tell you if you shift your mindset that it will come, or that if it's the right thing, it will happen. And it can feel really frustrating and really diminishing, right? It diminishes your experience when you're not getting what you think the perceived outcome should be, or what you think is supposed to happen. And so something that you just said of being led, I think when we are led, we can step into what we're doing next and trying to force what is supposed to happen. And that can be a really comforting thought, I think, when we're going through major health issues, which we've both experienced and have seen our clients experience, and that trauma that comes with healing that, that you can be led rather than, and you can be carried, right? Instead of having to do it yourself.
Totally. And it's the most humbling and empowering thing that I've ever actually done, when I can be humbled enough to say, okay, what is it that I'm actually supposed to be doing instead of what I think I'm going to be doing. It's so humbling, because you have to humble your ego to do that, because a lot of the time it's not exactly what you want. It is what you think it's like it's just not it's not always exactly what you want. Like, you know, a good example of like Gandhi could have always wanted to be a football player, but if he spent his life trying to be a football player, where would we have been without Gandhi? You know, he was such a profound messenger. So it's that thing where it's like humbling of like, what is it that is actually being laid out here for me? And then when you actually go through that place of humbling and being like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do, even though it's not what I thought I would do and where I thought I would be. And but then when you step onto that and commit to that, like, so empowering. The amount of life force that's just waiting to rush into you. And, you know, just talking a little bit more too about that place where there's all these like 5 steps to happiness, or, you know, like if you just change your mindset, your life will become better and your disease will, you know, just, you have to like, it's almost like you're still grasping for that magic pill. And it is challenging when you see all these people and you hear these stories. And there's also this like divine timing piece, right? Where you keep saying it's not linear, and it's not like you aren't going to have another challenge in the future. Life is full of challenge. Human suffering is the human condition, whether, you know, we like to or not admit it. We go through periods of suffering, whether we're grieving someone we've lost, or, you know, just there's many things. We're human. These things happen to us. And it isn't about, there's a learning piece, right? And there's this timing piece where we want it to happen now. And I had a really powerful session with my friend the other day, and I was having this month, I had a really challenging cycle with my endometriosis, and I was talking to her, and she was giving me this energy work, and she said a permission statement is coming up, and the statement was, I give my body the permission to have the length of time it will heal in. So it was like this permission of like, I allow my body to have its cycle no matter how long it's going to take. And that can be hard thing to accept, that there's not necessarily like this beginning and end to what we're working with, that it is a cyclical thing. And so, you know, for those of you who are out there who are listening, who are like looking for, you know, because there's so many people making money right now off of their whatever helped them, like whatever was the magic cure for them. They changed their mindset, or they changed their diet, or they changed their, you know, and it's just a piece of a whole puzzle with like, well, what else was happening in that person's life at that time? And we all are in whatever we're in to learn whatever we need to learn. And so, you know, we talk about being out in nature, being helpful, but we've also been talking about having a good mindset and also listening to your body and, it's the whole package that really comes along with it.
Absolutely. I think that just really reminds me of what a process it is to live this life and live it mindfully and healthfully if we choose to do so. And I've come to realize that not everybody wants the health and the mindfulness that and I think yourself totally geek out on, right? We're like, yes, I think you would feel better if you did this. And I think there is that magic pill that's still out there, which makes getting out into nature or addressing your trauma or addressing your addiction a way that's really a step outside of the norm in this day and age. And so there's really, what I say to my clients, no rocket science to how we're well. And granted, I'm practicing these things every day too, but the foundations that we set up of just having sleep and breathing and movement and getting outside and eating real food, if we aren't doing those things and participating in that on a regular basis, I liken that to, that old car analogy. Right. If you're not putting fuel into your car, or the right fuel, or if you're pouring the wrong liquid into the fuel tank, you don't expect your car to run. You also take your car in for regular oil changes and maintenance. And our bodies, even though they're spiritual and they can think and they can feel, they're a machine, and they are really wanting to find, or our brain, I guess, is really wanting to find the most efficient way to run this machine. And if we don't give it what it needs, it's not going to shift. And many times it's not going to shift overnight. There are instances, as we've both experienced, and a lot of the listeners have probably experienced too, but every day, what am I doing for myself? How can I give in the ways that I think I'm going to show up? What's going to bring me back into my center so that I can really live my fullest expression, even in the shadow of trauma, or in the shadow of stress, or the shadow of overstimulation, or the shadow of perfection. And so I think it's important that we remind everyone of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it was Tony Robbins that says change is a long process. Breakthrough happens in an instant. So it's about like building those foundations and building those foundations and building those foundations and building those foundations until your unique blueprint of a system, of a life, of a body can have those moments of breakthrough where it doesn't go back. You're not taking big steps back anymore. There might be hints of it, but it is forever changed. And I find that the wellness industry so focuses on that breakthrough moment of like, oh, I said this affirmation and my whole life changed. And I'm like, well, okay, but what were you doing? Were you just like not doing anything and then said the affirmation and it changed? Like, yeah, I think there's miracles happening.
I tried that, by the way.
I totally believe in miracles. But when I actually ask people like, well, what were you doing up to that point? It's like a great deal of things. It's like when we go on a cleanse, or we take time for ourselves, when we actually have that intention of like, I'm going to take time for myself, look at how many things you actually change in your life to do that. You generally sleep more, and you exercise, and you eat better, and you do all these things. And the accumulation of that brings us to that moment where we can find that last ingredient that really helps us with that breakthrough. And I think it's so important to really, I know you do with your clients, I do with mine, and a lot of the women we interview on here who are practitioners, we're all about those foundational pieces. The everyday, what are we doing every day in almost every moment of every day to really honor our being and our health and our lives. It's so important.
And I think as nourishing as the feminine can be, we start to lose some of that ability because we're always giving. The women's groups that I hold, we talk a lot about how We give to the community. We give to our children if we have them. We give to our partners if we have them. We give back to our family members. And one of the first pieces to go, and this I still really believe shouldn't be viewed as a luxury or selfish, is the nourishment to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the wild feminine really needs that to thrive.
Yeah.
And to heal, to maintain, to sustain our feminine energy. This is a necessity and not a luxury.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you are offering some amazing opportunities for us to do just that. And I'd love for you just to take the last few minutes that we have here to share about what is coming up in your world that we may partake in if we are needing to get out into nature and just do all those things that you were just talking about that aren't necessarily a luxury. They are essentials.
Yeah. So I touched on earlier the Rewild medicine retreat that my partner Rhett and I are offering in Mexico. And that's coming up in December. It's the first of many that we'll be offering, where it's a combination of, I would say, just enough adventure with the choice for doing yoga and self-care every single day, eating good food, and just being surrounded by a beautiful surroundings at Tailwind Jungle Lodge. So that's a really special place to us. And we look forward to sharing that with a lot of people. So that's one piece, and many of those to come, like I said. And I'm collaborating with a colleague to create an online nutrition forum, which I'm super excited about. I feel like a lot of times this nourishment piece is only looked at in terms of food, and we can break it down into all the components, which we will, but we also will bring it into the aspect of really finding nourishment across those foundations and making it accessible to people who might not think they can otherwise, quote unquote, I'm going to use that terminology, afford it, because we have to afford it if we want to take responsibility for our health and well-being and recovery. We can't recover if we don't have those things in place. And then I also offer one-on-one and group sessions. So I go around and I speak to different universities and events about health and yoga. And I also provide that in a clinic setting in the Santa Barbara area. So I love working with clients. We help build a Rewild Health Map, which lays out all of the things that we discuss in the first few sessions around your own personality, your tendencies towards sickness, your family history, your personal history, and bringing that all into context in a way that you can really understand which layers we might want to address first. So it's really fun and it's really informative. And I'm also offering that over the phone as well, which is just one of my favorite things to do with my clients.
Awesome. Well, I can definitely vouch for Kendall, and even just being friends with her, I've learned so much, and it's been great to have her expertise and friendship for sure. And you are interested in if her story and this conversation really spoke to you, I really recommend reaching out to her in some way. We're going to post all of her information on the blog, and I really hope that you can check it out because it's definitely worth doing it, and attend her Mexico retreat, maybe, to Rewild in Nature. It sounds amazing. And I just want to thank you for being here with us today in this amazing conversation. I feel like we could have talked for hours longer like we normally do when we get together. The conversations are usually like 3 to 5 hours long when we're in person. And yeah,
great.
Really thank you for being here.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough for inviting me to be on your podcast, and just for all the work that you're bringing, all the light that you're bringing to women, and the positive response that you bring to just being real and raw and vulnerable, because I really believe no other way to be, Kelsey. No other way.
Yeah.
So thank you for inviting women to hold that space for themselves. And something that we mentioned in one of our conversations, right, is that we also have to heal the masculine to be able to heal our feminine selves.
Absolutely.
So we all have to lift each other up. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being real, and just so much love to you. I love you, Kelsey.
Oh, I
Thank
love
you.
you too. Thanks so much.